Buddha Jayanti edition in Sri Lanka. These are more recent things. We just know PTS edition as a series has been started in a long time ago. It still continues. As I said, PTS text publishing started end of 19th century. Now it went through the entire 20th century. Now it has come to the 21st century. So that process goes on, unbroken, which is very interesting, because in England and Europe, these scholars, how they are dedicated for Pali studies, And then Chatta Sanghayana edition was done in 1954 to 56 in Yangon, and then with the international participation, and then that the edition has been printed. And then Buddha Jayanti edition also started in 1956. It continued for about 30 years and then completed. So it is not only a textual edition, but also a translation. So in Sri Lanka, you have both Pali and Sinhala side by side, the published in the text. And I see many things that can be improved in Buddha Jayanti text, because those are not really the exactly good textual editions from the modern standards, because there can be variant readings much more than Buddha Jayanti edition records. So, it is very interesting to see, even in the Chatta Sanghayana edition, you can look at it again, because by today, textual edition is, very developed academic exercise in many parts of the world. And there are lots of new methods. Also, it would be good for you to know more about how the biblical editions of the Bible were done, how some of the texts were read. More recently, I think this scholar is from working in Vancouver, Richard Solomon, has published the Gandhara Buddhist text. So up to this point, we did not know much about Gandhara Buddhist text. There were only fragments, like broken pieces of wood, broken pieces of the palm leaves, and then based on those things, now scholars have published Gandhara manuscripts. So those are very, very interesting. And then there are so many manuscripts inscribed on stones in China and other places. People are editing this. In this country, very close by here, you have, the Panchama Sanghayana slabs, all the Tripitaka written in, like that. So there are so many versions of Tripitaka available. So textual edition is, such an enormous project, and it can be improved from generation to generation. Right? We are trying to reach the as close as possible to the word of the Buddha. Right? So we have to go by the text. Okay. Do you have any questions or comments or anything about we have discussed so far up to this point? So basically, how to go editing, translating, and how to select a text, and the sort of annotated text, and these aspects. Any questions or anything to be discussed? Are there any of you who are doing textual research for your studies? Okay, go ahead.
You said if a scholar want to research about the textual, we have to variants and text. We have to read the variant text. In our country, there's some also and palm text, palm text,
palm leaf text.
Yes,
yeah.
Palm leaf text. Some of them are one thing originally one thing, but there's no different copy. There's no different copy. If someone wanted to research about this text, How should they do? And then as a scholar, wanted to take the textual text, at least how many variants and texts are doing?
Okay. Yeah, it's important question. Like there can be situations when you find only one text, only one manuscript. Then how are you going to edit? In fact, in that type of situation, critical edition is almost impossible, because critical edition cannot be done without comparing the same text with the counterparts of the same other the from various places. So if you find only one manuscript, what you can do is basically transliterate and study it and propose. If you think that there are problematic cases, you can point out to them. You can say that this looks like wrong reading, but you can't be sure. But if you have several manuscripts, so you have a problem, doubt about this particular word, then you can look at the other text. If the other text has the same word, same way, you look at the other text. When you look at the 3-4 texts, then you can decide, okay, this word has been copied consistently in all books. But copied consistently doesn't necessarily mean that it is the right reading. Maybe they copied the wrong thing consistently. Okay, that can happen also. So, I mean, simply by having that same word in different texts doesn't mean that it is the right thing. But at least you can see that that particular term has been consistent. Sometimes you may find one text with a different reading which looks like the correct reading. That's very interesting, because sometimes, that's why I said the genealogy of a text is very important. Sometimes with the accurate reading may be the first copy, but those who copied it, the first person copied it from the second copy. He also did the wrong thing, repeated the wrong thing. So it could be like that. But if you can trace the very early copy, then you can see that sometimes, So anyhow, with one single copy, critical edition is very difficult. But you can do annotated edition by providing your own accounts and your own observations about this thing. So if there is only one copy available, of course you must try to find whether there are other copies. So where to find will be, there are catalogs, there are records, and for example in Sri Lanka I know that someone has made the catalog of all the palm leaf manuscripts according to the places where they are available. So people usually refer to that catalog to see whether there is a copy. I mean, that is one way to do that. But of course that may not be 100% the right thing to do, because sometimes if that person missed any copy, then that is not found in the books. But then a lot of olive leaf, palm leaf books are found in, say for example, British Museum, British Library, and also in countries like Copenhagen. This critical Pali dictionary, that project lasted long years. It started in the middle of 19th century. The person who started that project had come to Sri Lanka, had taken hundreds of palm leaf manuscripts from Sri Lanka. So there are hundreds of palm leaf single letter manuscripts in Copenhagen, and then British Museum. So the same thing may be for Burmese text, because a lot of texts have been taken to those countries. I don't know whether you have any catalogue of those texts, Myanmar text, in British Library and other things here. So these are maybe there. If it is not there, maybe some people can go to British Museum and do those things, collect those things. So therefore, if it is only one text, it is very hard to do critical edition, but nevertheless you should edit it, because that is only in the palm leaf manuscript, so it is important to publish it. And someday some people might find different copies and do a better edition. That's okay. But still, as a scholar, you have done a good contribution. So no problem. And the other thing is, there is no exact number of that you have to have this number of manuscripts to edit a book or something. But your edition becomes more and more acceptable, more you find copies from different places, not from one place. As I said, in this a big country, if you can find manuscripts from various areas, south, north, like that, and then the reliability of your study becomes. But there is no minimum number or maximum number, there is nothing like that. I mean, if you can use 7, 8 manuscripts, I think that's a fairly good. 2, 3 manuscripts, all right. 7, 8 manuscripts means very good. So, it depends on like that. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, yes.
So, we should edit critical edition of the text in Korea. So, there are many various different editions in the world. Even in my country, there are many different variant edition of the
Okay,
text.
okay.
Okay, my question is, some various edition of the text change the meaning words of the Buddha. Change the meaning.
Okay.
But we couldn't change.
We'll answer your question by way of our next part of our discussion, because variant reading thing can be simply a technical thing. Like you take a text and take one text as the lead text and then just record the variant reading. But why we record the variant reading is so that people can look at the different words used by different people, so that you can interpret and you can try to understand. But in a textual edition and this whole area, there is always uncertainty, because we are just going by the text. So that is why we are trying to identify the most reliable word, but we don't know really, So that's why the textual edition is on the one hand very important, but on the other hand it's very difficult. I will give you an example, one simple example from a recent article. I mean, he wrote about 20 years back. Just one example. This particular Sri Lankan author writing one Kalama Sutta. So in the Kalama Sutta you have this. Atha Atha tumhe kalama. Okay. Now, if you change it etha. Now, what is the meaning of etha? Etha means here, in this context, right? So, etha can be translated here, in this matter, in this context. Now, what is etha? Etha means come, right? Etha, you come. So, basically, etha means ehi is the singular, etha is the plural. So, etha tumhe kalama, etha tumhe kalama, kalama you come, and something. And then if you think that it is etha kalamas in this context, or here. Now, the some Sri Lankan scholar writing on this, he thinks that in this place, ether doesn't make much sense. But if you think that it is ether, then what the Buddha says is kalamas in this context, or here, in this matter, So, it sounds very well. It seems to be meaning. But, this is not a very doctrinal point, okay? But, the simple difference is you add one tha, it becomes etha, and then it gets a different meaning. But if you just have etha, tumhe kalama etha ma anusavena ma paramparaya, and so on. Buddha says, don't accept anything like that. But if you take etha, etha means, it's very important. In this context, like what is the context? You are trying to decide what is good or what is bad. Then Buddha says that what is kusala, what is akusala. Then Buddha says that don't go by the tradition, don't go by this and don't go by that thing. But do you think what the Buddha said is applicable to everything? Suppose you go to doctor says that you have this illness, are you going to accept or not? Are you going to apply Kalama Sutta there? No. Because doctor knows better than my body than me, right? So doctor says you have this illness. Okay, I don't accept what the doctor says. Then what I do? I go to another doctor. And he also says, yes, you have this illness. Then what? I have to accept it, right? Maybe I go to the even third doctor. Third doctor also say, then what? Absolutely no problem. I have to believe that I have this illness, right? No Kalama Sutta. Okay. Now, interesting thing is, according to this author, he says that Buddha did not say this to each and everything. Buddha said only about kusala and akusala. So he has a good point. Then he says, it should not be etha, but should be etha. Okay. But then the problem is, you look at, then I looked at, like, for my own this thing, I look at the PTS translation. PTS text says etha. Buddha Jayanti text says etha. I think Chattasanggana text says etha. So you don't have one single instance where it says etha. So although the meaning wise etha seems to be better, you can't do that. You can't change it like that. You understand what I'm saying? So in a textual edition, sometime we may have a better reading if you change it. But on the other hand, you have to find at least one text, one manuscript, one copy where you have etha rather than etha. Otherwise you can't say, you have to change it. Of course the meaning seems to be better with etha, but as a textual scholar, you can't simply put the text you want. Maybe everybody made a mistake, but still then it's very difficult to change the text, like that. You must have some support. Suppose you found the text in Myanmar says etha, then you can say that, look, in such and such a place there is a text which says etha. Then you have a textual support. Otherwise you can't. So this interpretation and understanding and change in the text is something very. I will talk to you about it more when I come to the next section. Okay. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
You showed different types of Buddhist study.
Yeah.
Textual, comparative, and historical.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, for non-Buddhism, who want to study and who want to know Buddhism, what is the more benefit, textual or historical or comparative?
Actually, there is nothing like that for non-Buddhist or Buddhist. Whether you are Buddhist or not, these methods of studies are different methods. So anybody could do it, historical studies. But my discussion about whether you are a Buddhist or not can be influencing your studies, whatever the study you do. Even suppose you are doing historical study, but still, we interpret history. Suppose I am a Myanmar person, and then I think what happened in Myanmar is the right thing, what the Buddhist king did. Then I will look at it from a Myanmar point of view, that means internal point of view. So the foreigner looks at the same problem can be different, So actually being insider or being outsider is not connected to what type of study you are doing. Okay, it's not connected to it. But any type of study may be done by anybody. But whether you look from insider point of view or outsider point of view is a different matter. Actually, about insider and outsider's point of view, I am will be talking more on when it comes to sociological studies. Okay, is that make it clear? Okay. Yeah, satisfied or what? Anything else? Yes, sir.
So, just now you explained different ways on study belief Buddhism. So, I want to ask a question, different ways on study.
You mean your question is how to study a religion in order to change your belief?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. In fact, in actual practice, I don't think you are studying religion thinking that you should change, but basically what happens is like if I understood your question correctly, when you look at people who have, say, converted to Buddhism, okay, now you take a case of a person who is in a Western country, he just happened to see a book on Buddhism in the library, and he doesn't know anything about it. Simply because something he doesn't know, he takes the book and read it. And then he thinks that it's a good religion and he gets converted. Now that process, you don't start thinking that you should become a Buddhist and read it. No. You just start reading it just because it is something new. And then, you accept it, and then what happens is basically, Reverend, whenever you become a religious person, believing you usually read the text believing it, Then of course, even if there is something not very correct, you don't see that very much because you believe it. But the belief rises when you are convinced by reading. So, this is in a way a process, circle. First you read the text without knowing anything, then you find that what that text says is very good, so then you become a Buddhist, and then you read again, then you start seeing that those things are good. So, it goes like that, usually what happens. But in a research, what is important is, in a research, as I said at the very beginning, we are trying to produce a new knowledge, right? So when you try to produce a new knowledge, it is very important that, we see the things fairly objectively, as not a biased person. Otherwise, what happens is, you see everything in your religion is good, everything in other religion is bad. So, that even according to the Buddha is not a very good thing, because you should really, know, have the fairly objective mind. But on the other hand, when you look at the teaching of the Buddha, we know that what the Buddha taught, we see that it is as the right thing through our practice and, many other factors, okay. So, academic study has certain limitations. In academic study, we are trying to start with some kind of questioning and then try to answer it, okay. So, it's perfectly okay to prove your religion or whatever you believe in that religion, but in order to prove it, you have to have reasons. You can't simply say, it is good and it is this thing, but you have to say, because A, B, and C, so then you give reasons, That is how it happens.
Okay, I think, let's say religion and leader change, from religion to religion.
Yeah.
So, follows very, very difficult. Religion leader change for him very, very easy. But for follower, very, very difficult, I think.
Again, I'm not very sure I got your idea. When reading has to be, if you can do your reading fairly open-mindedly, then you start seeing more than one side, okay? But I mean, the difference between academic reading for academic purpose and reading for some kind of religious edification, I think two different things. Suppose you are living a religious life and you are meditating. In the meantime, you want to, as doing something simply because you can't be meditating whole day, so you read the Dhamma book. But then when you read that Dhamma book, you are not reading for analyzing very much. You are just reading for edification, for your own upliftment, right? You read the Dhamma book. You take page, any page. You read it, and then you go to back meditation or whatever. I mean, that is one way of reading it, that we do as a part of religious activity. But academic activity is basically different from that. But ultimately, academic activity can be helping your practice. Say, for example, you are a textual scholar, you want to understand the text correctly, and then understanding text correctly will help you to practice. So, two are not totally separated, but when you really do that, it appears that there are two different ways of to do that, So one thing is to try to see open-mindedly, but still see what's really the meaning, what's really going on. The other thing is, we just do religious readings for edification, like, our own improvement. So this is what can happen in these two things, okay? Yes, sir.
You mentioned Buddha Jayanti edition in Sri Lanka. Is that a kind of Tipitaka?
Pardon me?
Is that edition is a kind of Tipitaka?
I mean, no, it's the Buddha Jayanti edition is entire Tripitaka. So it started actually after the Chattasangayana thing. So Buddha Jayanti edition gives reference to Chattasangayana edition also. So, yeah.
English or
Sinhala. It's in Sinhala letter and with the Sinhala translation. So in order to read it, you must know the Sinhala letters. That's right. It's like the Chattasangayana edition. You have the Pali Tripitaka in Burmese letters. So it's like that. So the Buddha Jayanti edition was done by a whole group of senior Buddhist monks, and then it was completed in somewhere in 1980s, now about 25 years ago. Yeah. And then also it has a translation. Okay.
What is the most important and not to make some mistake or error when scholar take a research about the textual style of Buddhism?
Well, it depends on many factors. Suppose you are not a good expert in the Dhamma and the language, your textual edition cannot be very successful. Because textual edition has to be successful. In order to be successful, you have to have the knowledge of the subject. Suppose you are editing a grammar text, then you have to have a good grammatical knowledge. Suppose you are editing a medical text, then you have to have the good knowledge on the medicine. Same, suppose you are editing a Dhamma book or even Dhamma, Vinaya, Abhidhamma. So whatever the area in the Dhamma you are editing, you have to have a good knowledge. So that's one thing. And also the second thing is language. So these are the two main important factors. And then it helps you to really read the text fairly accurately. Otherwise, if you really don't know the subject matter, then how can you edit a text? So, but on the other hand, we really don't know exactly whether we have the 100% correct text. That also is a problem. But if you can corroborate it with other text and other terms, within the same Tripitaka, if you are doing a Tripitaka edition, then you can have a fairly reliable version of the text. Maybe we don't have 100% accurate text, because there is quite a lot textual analysis done by scholars today, and particularly in the Western countries like K.R. Norman and others. So when you look at them, you can see that they have gone into many Prakrit languages and others, and linguistic analysis, and comes up with a lot of things. So textual edition as a field, it's a very developed field today. So that's why I would like you to give you this idea of how across the world textual editions are being done. And as I said earlier, textual edition tradition is also found in the Christian religious traditions, where they have sometimes ago, now about more than 50 years ago, they discovered what's called Dead Sea Scrolls. If you Google it, Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean there is quite a lot of material. They found Dead Sea S-E-A-C scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls means they found some versions of Bible in the area called Dead Sea. So Dead Sea Scrolls. And there are so much discussion about how to translate, transliterate, and interpret these things. So the textual edition tradition is across the world. There are this is in the Christian scholarship, and then it can be in other religious traditions also, and Judaic religion also. There are quite a lot of textual studies. So look at these things, then you can get some idea how across the world different religions, how they do different textual studies. Yeah. So we can learn some techniques and some ways of doing things from those things, and also matters of interpretation. Next, let me come to this very important idea of this, Reverend, you also raised about it. Problems of translating text, which is associated with the problems of interpreting text. Since all translations are interpretations based on our understanding of the text, can we be really sure that we have translated the text correctly? How can there be more than one translation to one text? Are all translations equally true or valid? You have to know the difference between something being true and something being valid there. Then the textual studies as providing the basis for all other types of studies, the debate among scholars on the primacy of textual studies. That last point I will be talking to you last, but if you look at the first 3 points, problems of translating text and associated with problem of interpretation of text. Now, as some of you question, this whole exercise involves translating. In order to translate, you have to interpret. So we talk about translation, but when we talk about the translation, we have to talk about interpretation, understanding. So this problem of translation is something very important for us to think. When we translate one thing from one language to the other, how do we do that? Particularly, how do we know that whether we have the real meaning? Okay. Now, when the Buddha taught these things, we know that Buddha had some idea in his mind. Okay. So Buddha said these things by words. So ultimately what we have today is only words written on the text. Yes? Only words written on the text. Now the problem is, how do we understand? How do we know that what the Buddha meant by this term? How do we understand what the Buddha meant by this term? Can we go back to the brain inside of the Buddha and see what he meant? No, we cannot go into the brain of the Buddha. We don't know. but then what we have is the words. Now, Reverend, for a moment, forget about what the Buddha said and Buddha's sermons. Just think about what I am saying right now. I'm saying something, and you hear it, and then you understand something. The Venerable over there said something, but I could not understand very well. I mean, what is this? I say something, and then words come into your ears, and then you try to translate into your own understanding. So some kind of important psychological process is going on every time you hear something, every time you listen to something, every time you read something, some process goes on. Now this process is usually described in these two words, interpretation and understanding. Okay? Now some scholars do not like this word understanding very much, because understanding is something that happens inside our mind. Okay? But whether I understand something or whether how I understand something, nobody else can know it, right? Because understanding is something happening personally. So it is a psychological, mental act. So some modern scholars do not like to use that word, saying that that is something only related to each person's mind. But anyhow, being aware of that criticism, still we can talk about understanding something and interpreting something. However, these two processes are going on all the time. I say something, it comes to your ears, and then it goes through, and then it goes to your mind. Okay, this person said this. Now, if I make a statement, and I ask from you, what did I say? Then you say, okay, you said this. Now, that is a result of understanding and also some kind of interpretation. Now, this interpretation is very important, because every time we listen and understand something, we have interpreted it. Now, this is why I say something and I ask 10 people, what did I say? Then sometimes 10 people will say somewhat little different 10 things. How did that happen? That happened because what I am saying you interpret, you understand. Depending on your language, skills and many other things, you understand something me to have been saying. Same thing with, suppose you are reading a daily newspaper. Just a very simple thing. Then we ask, okay, what do you mean? What do you understand from that? Then you say something else, somebody else will say something else. Because although we read the same thing, we understand it differently, because our language skills can be different, our education can be different. So depending on many factors, our understanding and based on that interpretation can be different. Okay? Now another thing is, we always are engaged in these two things. We try to understand, we try to interpret. If understanding is a psychological thing, interpreting is, what you do when I ask, okay, what do you understand by that? Then you make a statement. That statement is basically, your interpretation. So the issue is, Reverend, every translation can be an interpretation. Okay? Like we think that you just say, okay, you take one word, you put another word. But it is not like that. Okay, you have Pali here, you have Myanmar here. You take Pali word and put a Burmese word. Now that, it is not that simple, okay? Translation cannot be done like that. You just exchange word for words, no. So, in order to translate, you have to understand. Understanding is some kind of interpretation. Interpretation means you interpret, you say this is what it means. And then, so therefore, problems of translating a text, which is associated with problems of interpreting a text. Now, these are not very easy, how we should interpret. Now, you look at the commentaries. We know Buddha Ghosha's commentaries, Dhammapala's commentaries. Now, what are the commentaries? Commentaries means Atha Katha. Atha Katha means Atha Katha. Atha means meaning, right? Atha means meaning. So Atha Katha or Artha Katha, Atha Katha means you are giving the meaning. So we have the word of the Buddha, and Buddha Ghosha says, this is what the Buddha meant by this is. You remember in one of my very early discussions, I talked about Sakanirutti. Sakanirutti. Sakanirutti means, Saka means one's own, Nirutti means language. Now the issue is, what is Buddha meant by Sakanirutti? So you don't look at Buddha Ghosha, then Sakanirutti is your own language. But you look at the Buddha Ghosha, he says that Sakanirutti is Buddha's own language. Two different meanings, right? Yes. Buddha says the only way we can go by that would be look at the language, look at the grammar, look at the various meanings of that term, and only decide. Then beyond that, we cannot know. So we have certain tools to use. These tools are language, grammar, evolution of the grammar, history of the grammar, all these things. And then depending on these things, we have to make an interpretation, or we have to say that this is what Buddha must have meant. Now, reverence, this is a persistent, continuing problem in translating and interpretations. Every time you translate into some language, you are translating and giving an interpretation. Every time you read something and grasping in your mind and say it again, then you are translating and interpreting it. You translate into your own words and you interpret. So translations are basically interpretations. You cannot translate without interpreting in some manner or other. But the interpretation, sometimes we go to the commentary and say, okay, this is what the commentary says, therefore this is what the Buddha meant. Right? But somehow or other, we are faced with this problem of translating a text associated with problem of interpreting a text. So whenever we translate a text, it involves interpretation and understanding. We understand, we interpret, and then we put this into word. Now, since all translations are interpretations, based on our understanding of the text, can we be really sure that we have translated the text correctly? Now, in textual translation, this is a central question. You translate, how do you know whether you translated it correctly or not? Now, one way to go, that would be you go to the commentary and see whether your translation goes along with the commentary. Or you can go to the sub-commentary, Tika, and the so on. There are various ways we can check that. But this question, how can we be really sure that we have translated the text correctly? And then we move to the next one. How can there be more than one translation to one text? Are all translations equally true or valid? And the difference between something being true and something being valid. Now, I'm using these two terms with some underlying important distinction between. Something to be true is one thing, something to be valid is somewhat different. Like in translation or in any similar activity, true means somewhat difficult. What is the true meaning of this? Basically, what we mean is, we go by okay, this is what the Buddha must have meant. So that is the true meaning of that. Okay? So we try to get at the Buddha's mind, what Buddha must have meant when he said that. However, validity doesn't mean necessarily true. Validity means something can be consistent with each other. Something can be consistent throughout the other translations. But consistency doesn't necessarily mean truthfulness, right? If you are a very clever liar, you can tell a very good lie, very consistent, right? You can tell a lie, very good lie. But it's a good lie. Good lie is very consistent with everything, so nobody can prove that it is a lie. But of course it is a lie. But you connect it in such a manner, nobody can say no. So that is a valid thing, but not true. Right? Do you see? Because a good lie is a consistent, valid thing. That's why people accept it. But to see that it is not truth. It's a lie. So this is the difference. But what is the true Dhamma? What is the valid Dhamma? What is validity? This two. I will give you a somewhat different example from, you know about Mahapadesha, right? Mahapadesha. Mahapadesha is what you find in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. Mahapadesha. Great indicators. Mahapadesha, great indicators. Now during the time of the Buddha, when the Buddha was living, people could go to the Buddha and ask whatever the doubts they had about the Dhamma, right? Now suppose after the Buddha attained parinirvana, someone comes from somewhere and say that, look, Buddha said this to me, but unfortunately nobody else was there. Then what are you going to do with that? Now this person says, Buddha said this, and he makes a statement, Buddha said this. But he says, I was the only person there was nobody else. So then question is, are you going to accept that to be the word of the Buddha or not? Buddha says that don't reject, don't accept. Neither reject nor accepting. What you need to do is you put that into the Dhamma, compare it with to the Dhamma, compare it to the Vinaya, and if it goes along with the Dhamma and the Vinaya, you accept it. If it doesn't tally with Dhamma and the Vinaya, you reject it. Now what is this criteria? What is this criteria? This criterion is used with described as, we say, coherence. Coherence means this particular statement is coherent with other statements. Okay? So this particular monk can come say that Buddha said this. How do you know that Buddha said this? I mean, there is no way, because Buddha has attained parinirvana. So you can go and ask from the Buddha. How can you decide whether Buddha said that? Buddha says, you put it into the Vinaya, you put that into the Dhamma. If it tallies with them, if it coherent with Dhamma and the Vinaya, then accept. Now the coherence means you already have something accepted to be Dhamma. If that goes along with that, that's a criterion. Now, Reverend, this is the same issue when we try to translate. How do we know that the truth? It's very difficult to know what the truth is. But you can always know whether something is coherent with other discourses, whether something is coherent with other Vinaya rules. Do you see the point I am trying to make? Coherence means we really don't know whether it is true or not. But you take the Dhamma, other discourses, if this particular discourse is coherent with other discourses, you accept it. Coherent means this sutta doesn't contradict the other suttas. The content of this particular sutta is telling with the content of the other suttas. And also this goes along with the Vinaya rules. So, accept it. Because for us, we really cannot know. What is this? Yeah, yankinchi subhasitam sabbantam tassa bhagavato vachanam. What is the meaning of this? Yankinchi subhasitam sabbantam tassa bhagavato vachanam. What is the meaning of it? Anybody want to say the meaning of that? What is the meaning of that? Yankinchi subhasitam sabbantam tassa bhagavato vachanam. What is the meaning? Come on, you folks are Pali scholars, Dhammacharyas.
We can't decide as just only two sentences.
No. Just give me the meaning of this sentence. This is a complete Pali sentence. So give me the meaning.
Yes, we can translate it that just only two sentences. It is
No, it's only one sentence. Yankinji subhasitam sabbantam tassa bhagavato vachala. No, although I wrote in 2 lines, it's just one sentence. Okay, I'm joking. Actually, it's a one sentence. It says, Yankinchi subhasitam, whatever is well said. Subhasita means well said. Sabbantam, all that. Tassa bhagavato vachanam, the word of that enlightened one. So, which means that it says that whatever is well said is the word of the Buddha. Now, what it means is, any subhasita, any well said statement can be considered as the word of the Buddha. Any well said statement. So which could mean that well said statement can be even not by the Buddha, even by somebody else. Now this is why Shravaka Bhasitas are becoming Buddha Bhashita. Because Shravaka Bhasitas are Subhasita. Now when the Shravaka Bhasita is Subhasita, it can become the word of the Buddha. Okay? So this is in Anguttara Nikaya. You can look at in the Anguttara Nikaya. And so the translation, I just gave you simple translation. What it means is, whatever is Subhasita. Subhasita means well said. Whatever is well said is the word of the Buddha. So this is basically then the problem is, what are the Subhasita? Now, Subhasitas can come from not only from the Buddha, it can come from Shravaka, Shravika, Devas, Brahmas, or anybody else. So whatever. Now, this whole Mahapadesha issue is that whenever you have something said as this is the word of the Buddha, how we are going to decide? In the absence of the Buddha, how can we know? There is no Buddha to ask from. So Buddha says, give the Mahapadesha. So whatever that goes along with the Dhamma and the Vinaya. Okay, think about it. Why I said this is simply because when you look at the problem of translation, you can't easily translate, because whenever you have to translate, you have to understand this. Since all translations are interpretations, we always have a problem. How can there be more than one translation to one text? Actually, I will discuss this same question when I am discussing Nagarjuna with you, Mula Madhyamika Karika. If I forget it, just remind me, because that's again interesting. Mula Madhyamika Karika has been translated by many different people. There are at least several English translations of this same text. So you can ask the question, how can you translate the same text in different translations? You can do that because translations are interpretation. You give one interpretation, and accordingly that interpretation you translate it. According to another interpretation, you translate it somewhat differently. So like that. So what I am saying is not necessarily about what the Buddha said, but generally there is the problem of translation and interpretation. Okay? And so are all translations equally true or valid? Now, truthfulness is one thing, but validity means if you can give a consistent translation, then it is valid. But whether this consistent translation is true, you don't know actually. Because, that has to be, maybe you have to meditate about it and practice it and, know it like that. And finally, textual studies as providing the basis for all other types of studies. The debate among scholars on the primacy of... I will talk to you a little bit about that, not today, but the other day. But I think we have touched the important point. I'm sure you may have some questions, so let me answer your questions and then we will wind up. So, Reverend, I think I responded to your question because, your question was basically how should we really know that, interpret and translation. In simply we can say that there is always a question there. So what we can do is we can get to the most reliable, translation possible, but of course we are not 100% sure. In the textual interpretation, like my example, Atha tumhe kalama or Atha tumhe kalama. We really don't know because Atha doesn't come kalamas, doesn't seem to have much sense there. But if you say kalamas on this matter, you don't, then it makes more sense. But on the other hand, we can't be smarter than the Buddha, right? So if Buddha did not use that word, we can't be introducing new word to the Buddha because no text support it like that. Okay, folks, if you have any questions or comments or doubts or anything. Any of you are here doing textual studies for your degrees or still not started or what? Going to start textual studies or what? But anyhow, textual studies are important because textual studies without studying the text, it is difficult to do other types of studies. So texts are very much basic. In that sense, texts are very important. Among the scholars, there is a debate. Some scholars say that, believe that textual studies are the most important thing. That's how you should do Buddhist studies. Some scholars say that not the textual studies, but sociological, anthropological studies are important. In fact, in Europe, usually they say that European scholars and English scholars go more for textual studies. If you take American scholars, Canadian, Australian. There arose a debate between the English scholar was Professor Richard Gomrich from Oxford University, and then there were the American scholars. So between them there was exchange of ideas because Professor Richard Gomrich, being from England, from Europe, he thought that textual studies are more important. But then American scholars thought that sociological studies, anthropological studies are more important. So there was an exchange of ideas, I remember still. But usually, traditionally, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and many other countries, traditionally Buddhist countries, we are engaged in a lot of textual studies. Actually, my own personal view is textual studies are very important. If you don't know the text, if you don't know what the Buddha said and the Dhamma Vinaya and the Abhidhamma, you cannot do other types of studies either. So I think in order for you to have a good basis, I think textual studies are very important. But you have to go beyond textual studies to other things. Yeah. Any question on this interpretation and translation relationship? Yes, yes.
That is not concerned with the methodology.
Pardon me?
It is not concerned.
Okay,
But in your very first speech,
that's okay. You can sit around. That's all.
In your very first speech, we all were born as Buddhists by lineage or tradition.
Okay.
Without critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But it is directly opposite what the Buddha taught in Dhamma Sutta.
Right.
Now, in in my university and also other university, even in Western, we all study other religions. So I would like to know your opinion. Why do we need to study other religions? We all study other religions for many reasons. What is your opinion?
Okay, your question is interesting. Most of the traditional Buddhist countries, we become Buddhist by tradition. It's true. I am Buddhist because my parents were Buddhists. And then my parents were Buddhist because their parents were Buddhist. However, having said that, there is an important difference here. Although I am born Buddhist and I became a Buddhist because of my parents, as an adult, having read Buddhist philosophy, Dhamma, at some point, you come to know that, okay, this is the proper teaching for you to follow. Okay, I'm not saying that that happens in everybody's life, but I'm sure that has happened in all of your life. That's why you have got into the robes. And then, it's true, we came to this religion by accident. If you are born in Europe in a Christian family, we are not Buddhist. If you are born in Bangladesh or something, you are not Buddhist, you are Islam. And then we will be fighting for Islam. But, so this is an accident. But even though we became Buddhist by accident, we become Buddhist as adults on our own understanding. If that did not happen, you are not a proper Buddhist, really. In all our life, that has to happen. At some point, you have to intellectually reflect about your religion and be convinced that it is the right religion, right? So that does happen by birth, and it will not happen to many people. Many ordinary people, they will never, but simply they will go by the tradition. They became Buddhist by birth and they will keep on doing things and they are happy about it. That's no problem. But for most of the educated, intelligent people, it becomes your religion by knowing about it, I remember I had some friend when I was a graduate student in Hawaii. She was a Japanese origin, and then she was a born Buddhist. And then when she was teenager, like 16, 17, she started reading Christian literature and she became Christian. Okay, and then by the time we met in the university, all of us were like in 30s, and then now she has become Buddhist again. So she was born Buddhist, and then she became Christian, and then she became Buddhist again. Then I asked how. Well, she became Christian because she had to read, she could read some Christian tracts and books, and so she thought, because being a traditional Japanese Buddhist, you don't read books. You simply become Japanese, anywhere you become Buddhist because your parents were Buddhist, that's all. But then the first thing she read was about the Christianity. So she became Christian. And then after her first degree as a graduate student, she again started reading about Buddhism, her own religion. And then she realized that that was really great. So, then she came back to Buddhism. You see this kind of transition, like you start being a Buddhist and then at some point you become intellectually reconverted. Like that happened. So, but anyhow, why you should learn other religions is, Reverend, something very interesting, because one thing is, although the path to nirvana is available only in Buddhism, when you read other religions' literature, you can learn quite a lot. You can broaden your understanding. You can see how other people think, because they think according to their religion. It's very important for us. Like suppose, you are in this country, like in Sri Lanka, we have, in addition to Buddhist, Christian both Protestant and Roman Catholic, Hindus, then Muslim. So we have all these religions. And then it is important for us to know what Muslim people think. What are their holidays? Why they are holidays? Why they respect certain things? Just to be peacefully living. And on the other hand, sometimes when you read the other texts, they are very, very interesting. There's so much you can learn. Like you read Bible and, such beautiful reading and, some stories. And I remember one story in Bible, like there are a lot of, this one woman, she has to go every day, so many miles to bring water. because they were living in the desert area. And then Jesus Christ says to this woman, the water I give will quench, that means satisfy your thirst eternally. And then this poor woman thinks that that's a very special type of water, and then she asked from Jesus, can you give me some water like that? But do you think Jesus was talking about drinking water? No, he was not talking about drinking water. When he said that the water I give will quench the eternal thirst eternally, he was talking about figuratively, right? So this poor woman could not understand what the Jesus said. Like that. But when you read that kind of stories, you see, how it's very interesting. So therefore you study other religions not to criticize, because ancient days you study other religions only to criticize. But today, because we are living with other people, and then there are certain things you can know about them also. And also you might find some subhasitas also. Who knows? Maybe not everything is wrong, here and there, maybe sometimes, maybe subhasita. Buddha could have said that, So anyhow, these are some of the reasons. Anything else? Okay, I will wind up. What you can do is, what I said about the interpretation, think on about it. So in my next discussion, we will have again kind of, summarizing these things, and then we will move on. So basically what I wanted to do today is, discuss different aspects of textual studies, because I am sure most of you are doing textual studies. Even if you are doing different things, still you need to read the text and understand. So, these things. Some of the theories I have been talking, like interpretation, translation as interpretation, are very popular in, postmodernism and, those theories, postmodernist theories. They talk quite a lot about interpretation and understanding and translating. So also the concept of text. Textual interpretation is very free. Like, if you have a painting on the wall, 10 people look at the painting and 10 people think 10 different things. And then, you go to the painter and ask, okay, what did you have in your mind? Painter will say a totally different story, right? And then today, the thinking is so much. They say that once the painter does his painting, his responsibility is over. So whatever you see is your interpretation. So painter has nothing to do with that, something like that. So the text is something over there. The book is something over there. You read and you try to understand it. So, your relation to the text. Those are very interesting things. So I'm talking to you on kind of what is called philosophical matters of translating, okay? So translation is not a pretty simple thing. Take Pali word and put the Burmese word. It's not that kind of thing. It's more creative exercise. Okay, Venerable, so thank you very much for listening, questions, and so we will meet in next week. Okay?